My name is Dorothy Miller. I'm 81 years old, and I live in a small brick house on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. The same house where I raised my children. The same house that used to feel so full of life it could barely contain the noise. Last Christmas Eve, I set the dining table for 7 people. 7 plates, 7 forks, 7 glasses. Only 2 chairs were filled, mine, and my younger sister Carol, who drove almost 3 hours through lake-effect snow because she said something in her gut told her I shouldn't be alone that night. At noon, my daughter Rebecca called. "Mom, the roads are awful," she said. "We'll come after the holidays, okay?" My son Andrew sent a text with a little Santa emoji and the words, "Love you, Mom." That was it. The green bean casserole went cold. The ham dried under the foil, and the mashed potatoes formed that thin gray skin they get when no one touches them. Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They're busy, Dottie," she said softly. "You know they love you." And I smiled, because when someone is trying to protect you from the truth, smiling is sometimes the kindest lie you can give them. But here's what I didn't tell her. I had spent 3 full days cooking food nobody asked for. The honey-glazed ham, the cranberry pie, my late husband's favorite cornbread stuffing recipe. I thought if I made everything perfect enough, my children would want to come. That night, after Carol left, I stood at the kitchen sink scraping untouched casserole into the trash, and a thought hit me so hard it felt like a punch to the ribs. When did I become someone my own children avoid? The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming like an engine in an empty garage. I raised 4 children in that house. 4. I showed up for every school play, every band concert, every soccer game where I froze on metal bleachers holding a thermos of coffee. For 20 years straight, I packed lunches before sunrise. I answered 2 a.m. phone calls when they were teenagers who made bad decisions and needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. I thought we were close. Maybe not perfect, but close enough. But somewhere between their childhoods and my old age, I became optional. A name on their holiday guilt list. A voice they answered with a sigh. And the worst part? I couldn't even tell you exactly when it happened. At first, I told myself it was temporary. They had jobs, kids, mortgages, real lives. I understood that. I wasn't one of those mothers who expected daily phone calls. I just wanted something. Anything that made it feel like I still existed somewhere inside the shape of their days. For nearly 10 years, I did exactly what every book, every magazine article in a doctor's waiting room, and every well-meaning friend told me to do. Call your children. Show up. Be available. Be easy to love. Be grateful for whatever attention they give you. So that's what I did. I called on Sundays, sometimes Wednesdays, sometimes just because I missed hearing their voices. "Hi, honey, just checking in." They'd say they were fine. I'd ask about the grandkids. "School's good." "Soccer's going well." "Yeah, we're all good." Conversations that felt less like talking and more like checking a box. Sometimes the calls went straight to voicemail. Other times they answered while doing 3 other things at once. I could hear dishes clattering, car turn signals blinking, computer keyboards clicking, like I was something they squeezed in between errands. Eventually, I started keeping the calls short so they wouldn't have to. I'd hang up feeling smaller than when I dialed. So I tried another strategy. I tried being useful. I mailed birthday cards with checks inside. I sent little packages to my grandchildren, a toy fire truck, a picture book about dinosaurs, hair ribbons I saw at Target that reminded me of my granddaughter. I imagined them opening the package and thinking, Grandma remembered. Maybe they'd smile. Maybe they'd call. Sometimes the thank you came weeks later. Sometimes it never came at all. and I started wondering if the boxes even made it into the house, or if they sat unopened in a pile by the door like junk mail. Once, I offered to babysit. My daughter Melissa laughed softly and said, "Oh, Mom, that's sweet, but you don't have to do that." Like spending an afternoon with my grandchildren was some kind of charity project I had volunteered for, like the idea of me being there was inconvenient. One Saturday, I drove an hour and 20 minutes to my son Daniel's house in Akron. I made a lasagna from scratch that morning. Ricotta, fresh basil, the whole thing. When I got close, I called and said, "I'm in the neighborhood." That was a lie. I just wanted to see him. Daniel met me at the front door. He took the dish, thanked me, then said they were about to head out to a birthday party. I stood on his porch for maybe 90 seconds. He hugged me the way you hug someone at a funeral reception. Polite, careful, already halfway gone. I cried the entire drive back to Cleveland, and the worst part? I felt pathetic for crying. But still, I kept trying, because that's what mothers do. I planned a family dinner at my house one spring, gave them 3 weeks' notice. "Don't bring anything," I told them. "Just come." Rebecca said maybe. Andrew said he'd try. Melissa said she had something that weekend, but would let me know. The day came. I made a pot roast, roasted carrots, fresh bread. I even used the good cloth napkins that sit in the drawer all year. 5 o'clock passed. Rebecca called to say my grandson had a baseball thing. Andrew didn't call at all. Melissa arrived an hour late, stayed 20 minutes, and spent most of that time looking at her phone. I sent her home with leftovers she didn't ask for, then I washed the dishes alone. Standing at the sink, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. Why do I keep doing this to myself? Because the worst part wasn't that they didn't come. The worst part was this. They didn't even seem to feel bad about it. And that's when something ugly dawned on me. I had worked so hard to stay in their lives that I had slowly made myself invisible. I was background noise, the person who always called, always tried, always forgave, always waited. They didn't have to think about me because I never gave them the chance to miss me. And the truth hurts to say out loud, but it matters. I trained them to take me for granted, and then I resented them for learning the lesson. One afternoon, something strange happened. Something small, but it changed everything. I was walking Lily Parker, the little girl who lives 2 houses down from me, home from Roosevelt Elementary. Her mother, Jessica, works late shifts at the hospital, so sometimes Lily waits at my house after school. That day, we stopped at the corner crosswalk like we always do. She was telling me about a picture she drew. Something about a purple dinosaur fighting a robot. Halfway through the story, she reached over and grabbed my hand. Just like that. No reason, no ceremony. Her little hand slipped into mine like it belonged there. And we walked the rest of the block like that. That moment hit me harder than anything had in years. Because Lily wasn't holding my hand out of obligation. She wasn't squeezing me into her schedule. She was 8 years old, and she chose to walk beside me because she wanted to, not because she had to. And standing there at that crosswalk, with traffic rolling past and the wind coming off Lake Erie, a thought finally clicked into place. A thought that would change everything I did next. But the decision I made after that was something every parenting book in America tells you never to do. And when I did it, my children thought I had lost my mind. But strangely enough, it's the one thing that finally made them start coming back. After that walk with Lily, something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. Because standing there at that crosswalk, with that little girl's hand in mine, I realized something that made my stomach drop. Lily didn't spend time with me because I begged her to. She didn't come over because I reminded her. She came because when she knocked on my door, there was space for her. I wasn't chasing her. I wasn't asking anything from her. I wasn't making her responsible for my loneliness. I was just there, and that made her want to stay. A few days later, her mother, Jessica Parker, started stopping by more often. At first, it was small things. She'd knock and ask, "Dorothy, I'm running to the grocery store. Need anything?" Or, "Mind if Lily sits with you for a bit while I fold laundry?" Ordinary things, simple things, but they were real. I didn't have to cook a feast. I didn't have to pretend my life was exciting. I didn't have to perform the role of perfect mother who needs nothing. I could just be myself, an old woman in comfortable shoes who sometimes drank bad coffee and complained about her knees. And they stayed anyway. That's when I noticed something important. Jessica and Lily didn't come over because I had earned it. They came because there was room for them, because I wasn't filling every silence with my need to be needed. I had stopped chasing, and in that stillness, something new grew. Not obligation, not guilt, just presence, the kind you can't force, the kind people give freely. And that's when I made a decision that scared me more than anything I had done in years. I did the thing every article about family relationships tells you never to do. I stopped calling my children, not out of anger, not to punish them, not to prove some dramatic point. I simply couldn't keep pretending the effort between us was equal. I couldn't keep begging for attention that never arrived on its own. It hurt too much. So I stopped. I stopped texting first. I stopped calling on Sundays. I stopped sending cards, gifts, invitations, reminders. I stopped being the person who held the thread that kept our family stitched together. I let the phone sit silent. I let the calendar stay empty. And I waited to see what would happen if I stopped pulling. At first, nothing. Weeks passed. No calls, no messages, no, "Hey, Mom," just checking in. The silence was brutal. I would sit in my living room at night staring at my phone like it might suddenly wake up and remember me. Sometimes I almost broke. I'd pick up the phone, scroll to Rebecca's name, and stop, my finger hovering over the call button. I thought, just call. At least you'll hear her voice. But then another thought would follow. And what happens after that, Dorothy? Another distracted conversation, another quick goodbye, another reminder that I was the only one trying. So I didn't call. I stayed quiet. And that quiet felt like drowning. Some nights the house was so still it felt like the walls were leaning in. The clock in the hallway sounded louder than a hammer. I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe mothers weren't supposed to stop. Maybe I was supposed to keep trying forever. But I held still. And then, about 6 weeks later, something happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The phone rang. I looked down and saw the name Rebecca, my daughter, the one who always said she was busy. I answered. She sounded confused. "Mom, I haven't heard from you in a while. Are you okay?" I almost laughed. 6 weeks. That's how long it took. "I'm fine," I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said something I hadn't heard in years. "Can I come by this weekend? I want to see you." Not I should. Not I have to. I want to. I said yes. She came that Saturday, and something about the visit felt different. She stayed 3 hours. We drank coffee. We talked about nothing important. But the way she looked at me, it was like she was seeing me for the first time in years, not just as Mom, but as a person, a woman, someone who had a life outside of waiting by the phone. A week later, Andrew texted, "Hey, Mom, can I bring the kids by Sunday?" Then Melissa called and asked if I wanted to go to lunch. And one afternoon I came home from the grocery store and found Daniel fixing my porch railing. I hadn't asked him. He just showed up with tools. It wasn't perfect. They didn't suddenly become the kind of children who called every day. But something had shifted. The visits felt lighter, more genuine, like they were there because they wanted to be, not because I had chased them down. And the strangest part? My life had already started changing before they came back, because during those quiet weeks, I had stopped waiting for them to fill the empty spaces. I started building a life that didn't require their presence to feel whole. Morning walks, afternoons with Lily, evenings reading in the chair by the window, Jessica's terrible coffee, conversations that had nothing to do with being someone's mother. For the first time in decades, I remembered I was still Dorothy Miller, not just mom, not just the woman who hosts Thanksgiving, not just the person who fixes problems and waits patiently, just Dorothy. And strangely enough, that version of me was someone my children suddenly wanted to be around again. But the biggest lesson from all of this was something I wish someone had told me 20 years earlier, because it wasn't really about my children at all. It was about me. And in the next part, I'm going to tell you the truth most parents are afraid to say out loud. Why chasing your children can slowly make you disappear in their lives. And why stopping might be the most powerful thing you ever do. By the time I turned 81, I had spent more than 5 decades being someone's mother. And I was proud of that. Raising children is messy, exhausting, beautiful work. It's the kind of job where you pour pieces of yourself into other human beings until one day they walk out the door carrying those pieces with them. But somewhere along the way, I forgot something important. I forgot that before I was mom, I was also Dorothy Miller, a woman who had opinions, a woman who liked quiet mornings and terrible mystery novels, a woman who took up space in the world. For years, I made myself smaller so my children wouldn't feel burdened by me. I pretended I wasn't lonely. I pretended the silence didn't bother me. I pretended their crumbs of attention were enough. And every time I did that, I erased a little more of myself. Until one day I looked around my own life and realized something terrifying. I had become a background character in my own story. And when people become background characters, everyone eventually stops noticing when they're there or when they're gone. That's the truth nobody tells parents. You can love your children deeply. You can sacrifice for them. You can show up for every moment of their lives. And still, if you spend years making yourself endlessly available, they may slowly start believing you require nothing. Not because they're cruel, but because that's the story you taught them. I taught my children that I would always call first, that I would always drive to them, that I would always forgive forgotten birthdays and missed dinners, that my time, my presence, my life would always be waiting patiently on a shelf. So they stopped worrying about losing it. And the moment I stopped chasing them, something powerful happened. For the first time in years, there was space where I used to be. And suddenly, they could feel it. When I didn't call on Sunday, they noticed. When no birthday cards arrived in the mail, they noticed. When weeks passed without hearing my voice, they wondered why. That silence forced them to do something they hadn't done in a long time. They had to think about me, not because I reminded them, because the absence made them curious, and curiosity turned into something else, concern. Concern turned into effort, and effort turned into presence. But here's the part that surprised me the most. Even if they had never come back, I would still be okay. Because during those quiet months, I built something I hadn't had in years, a life that belonged to me. I had morning walks with Lily Parker, who still insists on telling me every detail of her school day. I had long conversations with Jessica Parker on my front porch about things neither of us can fix. I had evenings that were peaceful instead of heavy. Books, music, the sound of wind moving through the maple tree in my yard. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped measuring my worth by how often my children called. Some of them are closer to me now. Some still keep a little distance. And that's okay, because I'm not chasing anyone anymore. I'm not trying to collect people like proof that I matter. The ones who want to be here show up. The ones who don't, I love from a distance. And strangely enough, that love feels calmer than the desperate kind I carried before. Here's the truth I want every parent over 60 to hear. Love is not the same as attention. Your children might love you deeply, but love alone doesn't guarantee time, effort, or presence. Those things require awareness. And sometimes the only way people become aware of your value is when they feel what life is like without you constantly reaching for them. You cannot force someone to want your company. You cannot beg your way into someone's schedule, but you can do one powerful thing. You can stop making it so easy for them not to miss you, not out of anger, not out of punishment, out of self-respect. Because the people who truly love you will eventually notice when the voice that always called suddenly goes quiet. They'll notice the empty space, and if you're lucky, they'll come looking. Not because you begged them to, because they realized something important, that the woman they thought would always be waiting is someone worth showing up for. These days, my house in Cleveland feels different. It's still quiet sometimes, but it's not the heavy silence I used to dread. Now it's the kind of quiet that belongs to someone who knows she still has a life left to live. My children visit more often now. Sometimes they show up on Sunday afternoons without warning. Sometimes the grandkids run through the front door before anyone knocks. Sometimes weeks pass without seeing them. And that's okay too. Because I'm not sitting by the phone anymore. I'm living my life. I'm still Dorothy Miller. Still here, still whole, still worth visiting, whether anyone comes or not. And if you've been sitting in a quiet house wondering when your children stopped needing you, I hope my story reminds you of something. You didn't stop mattering. You may have just been trying too hard to prove it. Thank you for spending this time with me. It means more than you know. And if this story felt a little too familiar, I made another video recently about 3 habits that help me stay strong while living alone after 80. A lot of women wrote to me saying it helped them more than they expected. If you'd like to watch it, it should be right here on your screen. I'll see you there. And until then, take care of yourself, whatever that looks like for you.